All right, so this is chapter 7. We're going to talk about the age of science and enlightenment in this chapter. So, unfortunately, I recorded this lecture already, made a PowerPoint and everything, and then my computer crashed and deleted both the PowerPoint and the recording. Don't have time to remake all that. So I'm just going to use the textbook PowerPoint today. I know it's a little bit more boring and dull, but it's going to go over the same stuff. So uh, I think we'll be fine for just today. All right. So the time period that we're talking about here is about 1560 to 1789. Now, what you might notice there is we're now getting up into the start of the United States. So a lot of our foundation as a American society comes from the ideals that were being presented at this time. And I think you'll start to see that as we go. So at this point, the Renaissance has happened, the Reformation has happened, and basically what society is doing is reacting to the changes that occurred during the Renaissance and Reformation, right? So now the Catholic Church doesn't have quite as much power. We have changes and shifts in how we approach science and understanding the world from the Renaissance. And part of that is now we're pushing for more for individual rights rather than the rights of the whole society, are just solely focused on improving the society. We're now actually worried about the common man. There's more focus on this world because the Catholic Church now has levels of distrust placed in them. So now, as people are no longer trusting the Catholic Church 100%, people are focusing more on this lifetime. What happens here? What if they no longer believe in something that's coming next? Then why would they worry about anything other than the here and now? And so that secularization is kind of coming through. So as for metaphysics, they're really focusing a lot on the material world, like I said. So as part of this, we're now really focusing on science and being able to dive into what's around us and understand it better. We're focusing in on the development of being able to understand things that are smaller than us through microscopes, or things that are bigger than us but far away through telescopes. We're doing a lot more experimentation to really understand what makes up the fabric of this society. Or not this society, but the fabric of this earth and our universe. Now, because of this, and because the church now has some distrust in it, the spiritual world is kind of considered less important through this period of time. So, what happens, though, is now you have this weird clash where people are trying to say either they believe fully in science or believe fully in religion, and religion is exclusive of science and science is exclusive of religion. Now, this might sound familiar because, like I said, it leaks down into today, right? So we hear this all the time where people are like, religion and science don't merge together, which is kind of a ridiculous concept when you start to look at them. There's lots of ways you can say, you can explain how both science and religion are correct and how you can merge them, right? Because you can't have religion without accepting just the cold hard facts. Like, for example, one of the big issues, and we'll talk about this, is the religious people of that time got all up in arms because they thought that the earth was the center of the universe and not the sun. So once we discovered that the sun is, or the sun is the center of our solar system, they thought that was very against the Bible. Well, that's ridiculous, right? There's no reason why believing the sun is the center of our solar system is contraindicative of something in the Bible, right? That's just a where someone was focusing way too much on the wrong things. So even though some people are shunning science at this time, a lot of people were focusing and kind of agreeing with both. Um, some churchgoers were actually embracing society or science and the discoveries that were coming, which um, which is a good thing, I think, as a general statement. Um, so a lot of people are focusing on different things, like I've kind of been explained. In those who are more secular, they're really focusing on making this life as good as it can be, right? Which makes sense. You want to be comfortable in this life if you think this life is all you have. So because this, medicine and science and technology are improving, we're trying to, people are just trying to make this life comfortable. Now, you could make an argument that that's also one of the goals of Christianity, right? Is to make this life be with less toil. So at the fall of creation, and everything became spoiled and filled with toil, and you had to work, that was taking things away from God. Now, a world that's pure and with God, the creation before the fall, didn't have toil. So by adding medicine and science and technology, you're removing toil and bringing ourselves closer to when creation will be restored, which is a concept that kind of, I think, helps, in my mind at least, merge the idea of science and religion together. So, like I said, you're starting to see our ability to actually observe the world around us expand. We have microscopes, we have telescopes, we have different tools. Like, I'm in a lab right now, like I said, look at all these tools in here. Right? There's just tables and tables of tools, all meant to measure different parts of this world. I can take my blood out and I can go put it in this freezer and store it for months or years. And then I can come over here and we can have our spectrophotometer and run a microplate. And we can analyze what different biomarkers are happening in the blood, right? Same with all these. We have all these different tools that we're using to be able to measure the world around us. And this is really springing out of this time of this age of science and this age of enlightenment. It's allowing us to do things that our societies and cultures weren't able to do before. All right, so because of this change in society, one of the political changes was now the common man was the center theme of politics. Which traces, right? Think about it. Today, politics is all about democracy. Each person has a voice. Well, that's a whole new concept that's just now kind of happening within the Enlightenment. You know, you have the United States was springing out of this time. You have Europe was starting to adopt democracy or more democratic systems than like having a monarch, right? Because up to this point, the only person in charge was either the king, the pope, or someone who worked directly for them. But now the world is more focused on the individual person. And part of this is happening because religion, again, is through the Reformation, we're focusing on the church has abused its power. It's turned from pursuing God to instead it's now pursuing material and power. So people are now saying, okay, that's flawed. Let's focus more on the common person because the Reformation is focused on a individual's ability to kind of communicate with God directly. So it's putting a lot more power into the hands of the people, which is great. That's what I think most of us probably believe in. Again, kings, religion, state kind of falling off. Now, as part of this, if you want an individual person to do really well, what do they need? They need to be educated to understand. So that becomes one of the primary focuses, and it was something that really affects physical education. Because rather than an individual person earning or getting the privilege of education just because of their social status, if power is put in the hands of the common man, then the common man needs to have education to be able to utilize that power. So this is where kind of public education starting to spring out of, where people are saying, hey, look, we need to educate everyone, whether they're rich, poor, no matter what, they need an education. Additionally, your average person's able to read. We have the printing press at this point, which allows us to, rather than write every single book by hand, we can just print press it. Meaning that rather than there being one Bible per town in the hands of a religious leader, there can be a Bible in everyone's home. Or today, where you might have multiple Bibles inside your home. Or if you want to read the works of Plato, you can get that off Amazon. Or in their case, they could go get it as a common person. They didn't need to be some powerful person. So through education, ability to read and understand, things are moving along. Now sport kind of goes right alongside this. So because people are more secular and not focusing on the next life, it becomes a lot more important to enjoy this life and to be healthy, right? So in this case, play is more justified because, and it's legitimate because it's important to enjoy this life. And now you have a lot of the Christians and other religious groups are starting to say, hey, look, it's okay to play and to enjoy life, that enjoying life isn't counterproductive to serving God. You can do both. Something that we kind of believe today, right? So basically a lot of what's happening here with the physical education and this shift is carried on to today. And likewise, philosophers and educators, people who are paving the way for public education, are saying, hey, look, our bodies play a role in how we perceive this world, so we need to train our bodies up. We need to be educated in both mind, spirit, and body. Now, historically, you have a lot of stuff going on, and I'm going to actually start at the bottom of this, but you have the Little Ice Age. So we know that throughout time there is some fluctuations in global climate, right? And that's even beyond anthropomorphic or man-made climate change. So man-made climate change is obviously causing spikes outside of those normal fluctuations, but at this point you have a little ice age where we're going through the fluctuations and it's fluctuating cold. Now what this meant is each year there might be a few more days or a few more weeks of bitter cold winters. They're extending longer. Now those few weeks probably in our minds would make a big difference, but if you have an agricultural community and your harvest is delayed or your plants are killed off by a late frost or an early frost, and that's a huge deal. And what's kind of happening from this is the crops and the consistency of the food supply is declining. And that's causing an economic depression where people are not able to make their money or have good trade systems because there just wasn't enough to trade. There was no excess to go hand this food over to them and them send this food over here because people just didn't have the crops at the levels that they needed. Because trade dropped off, people were unemployed. It was just a rough time. Now, additionally, to make this even more complex, you have all these countries are kind of going through this shift and this enlightenment where you're saying, okay, common man matters, monarchy doesn't matter, and you have governments being overthrown, you have people just arguing back and forth over what the new political system should be. And because this, you have tension over old and new government. You also have countries going at it. So we got war, and then to make it even worse, we got the plague, right? So you've seen my original PowerPoint had a picture of one of the 17th century plague doctors, so you might have seen a picture before, but they have the long beak-like mask, so they'd wear this mask, and then they'd put flowers to kind of mask the smell of death around them. It would keep them farther away. They'd carry a stick, and they'd use the stick to poke people. So we kind of laugh. I saw something the other day saying, like, this was the first time in history that we had to keep 6 feet away, or we had to wear a mask, and that was their argument. And beyond your beliefs about mask and social distancing or whatever, it was just funny because I was like, well, actually, back in the plague in the 17th century, they used a 6-foot stick to keep themselves away, or roughly 6 foot, and then they also wore masks to kind of help filter, even way back then. But this is just a rough time to be alive. There's a lot going on. Things are changing quick. The economy's bad. Food supply's low. Everyone's getting sick. It's winter for way longer than it should. So they were probably not very comfortable. All right, so I'm about to kind of blaze through some of these philosophers. Again, I want you to understand their concepts to some degree. But our first one here is Rousseau. He's big into he says the man's good by nature. So man is inherently good. It was one of his big arguments. He talked about education and educating people. You have Voltaire. You might have heard of Voltaire before. He was a Frenchman, and he was kind of poking holes and arguing with the institutions of the day. So one of those is he argued with the core ideals of the church and the doctrines of the church. He also was writing a lot of satirical works. But one of his big things, and I think one of his big influences, is that he influenced Thomas Paine, and Thomas Paine and others who were influenced by Voltaire led to the French Revolution, which was a big, big change in France. You have Diderot, I believe is how you say that name. I don't know, you guys might be too young, but I'm 25, yet I still remember encyclopedias and having to read in encyclopedias for school because not everyone had smartphones or you didn't have computers or whatever at your desk at school. So he argued, or he wrote the first encyclopedias. Now this was important because you're delivering information to the common man. These are books. They're sort of like dictionaries. You go to the definition. Let's say you're looking up pen. You look up pen. It would give you a page or two about pens, the history of pens, how pens work, what a pen is. Yeah, lots of ideas. It's basically just a collection of all the arts and the humanity, or arts and sciences that they had. Now the problem here was he also included some ideas that, not problem necessarily, but a point of tension was that he included some ideas that were pretty radical for the day. And as part of that, the king really hated him because he was including things that were kind of counterproductive to the king's mission of keeping himself in power. Again, a lot of these scientists are inherently political. These philosophers are inherently political because what they believe is counter to what's going on. You have Galileo, so you've heard of Galileo, right? He's the one who was saying that the sun's the center of the solar system. Because of this, he was thrown in jail because the church thought that was a threat to the Bible. So he got thrown in prison over that. even though, so it was Copernicus who actually came up with that, but he built upon. You then have Francis Bacon. So Francis Bacon, Englishman, um, his big ideas were that science should be utilized to help the people, make the lives of the people better, something that we still believe today, right? And then he also argued that science should be divided into disciplines, which makes sense. We're now at the point where someone can't just be a scientist and study anything. We have enough knowledge that people need to start specializing, same as today. Um, I work on a daily basis with people who are specialists, nutritionists. I work with exercise physiologists. I work with biochemists. I work with chemists. Um, I work with biologists. I work with public health officials, right? So all of these scientists are divided down into specialties. And that was a big idea introduced by Bacon, or really pushed by Bacon. Um, Newton, so you've heard the Newton's laws in physics, 3 laws of motion. Huge mathematician, physicist, mechanical theory. Believed that God had created the universe as this just kind of predictable and perfect machine. You have Descartes. Descartes. I forget how to pronounce that one. I looked it up the other day, but forgot. Dualist approach of mind and body. So again, he kind of had that dualist ideas. And one of his big ideas was what's called building block theory. So building block theory is where you start and build a base layer of knowledge, and then you work your way up. So what you have to do then is you have to kind of prove the most simple ideas. You need to say, the foundation that we're building everything on, let's make sure that is true. Let's make sure that is accurate, because otherwise, as we start to build to more complex ideas, if you don't have the simple ones lined up, then whatever complex idea you have just topples over because the simple idea that it's based on wasn't true. So you just build, and try to get to more and more complex ideas, which is how things work today still. Like, right, I'm taking, with my dissertation here, I'm taking ideas that have kind of already been set, that are pretty simple, and I'm just adding the next layer to them. And hopefully someday someone will add the next layer to my idea, and so on. You also have Hobbes. So Hobbes was big into removing God from philosophy. So Hobbes was saying that philosophy should be a field, theology should be a field. They do not necessarily need to be the same, which I think I would agree with, but a lot of people felt very threatened by that. But I think each can learn from each other when they're done separately, which is important. But something we still do today, right? You have most philosophers know a little bit about theology. Most theologians know a little bit about philosophy, or more than a little bit on either side, but they do specialize. Same idea as science, I think. So as for education, the body is important, which is great, right? So we're focusing on the here and now. The body is important as part of that. So now you're moving forward. So you have humanist. So the humanists were, or excuse me, the realist. So the realists were were focused on the study of reality, and they did this in 3 ways. There was humanist realism, there was social realism, and sense realism. So humanist realists were concerned with kind of this classic stuff that was coming from Greek and Rome, the Greeks and the Romans. So they would study classic literature, they would read their books, their languages, and also they added physical education as part of that. Social realists were focused on the social graces that you need to be part of a society. So that was a lot about politics and just being a good socialite as part of your being able to interact with others. You also had sense realist. So sense realist, they were really different. They said that students should be taught in their own language and learn based off scientifically sound principles. So that's important, right? Because before, a lot of education was just done in Latin, but the common man no longer knew Latin, so you had to know Latin before you could be educated. But since realists were saying, hey, we're trying to teach a classroom full of native English speakers, let's teach the class in English, or native French speakers, let's teach it in French. So some big educators, we have our first one here, argued that people should be well-rounded individuals. So you need to have strong soul, strong mind, and strong body. And that's important because if you don't have each of those, then you aren't a well-rounded individual and you have flaws that will come out in how you interact with society. So he took this so far as to say that people needed, from the physical education standpoint, that people need to go through rigorous training. And when I say rigorous, I mean he would have been the guy who says, let's make sure they have a rough childhood. Let's throw them out in the woods and the outdoors and make them go through some really grueling physical training. If they are to be well-rounded individuals, they need to experience that as kids. John Locke, you may have heard of John Locke. A quote from him is, a sound mind and a sound body, which I believe is actually Asics, the shoe brand Asics. I think that's their motto still. But basically the idea here is that it's important to have a good mind, it's important to have a good body. And he's a social realist, so he's saying this from the standpoint of to just be a member of society, to be into politics, to understand you need both. And then you have Mulcaster, who was a sense realist. So he believed that all people should get educated. And he also believed that experience was more important than reading and studying. So he thought, for example, physical education would be good because if you go outside to learn, that's better than learning in the classroom. If you're going to study plants, go look up plants. Don't read a book about plants. And that was his argument, which I think I really respect. So the philosophies, the bourgeoisie, you may have heard that term before, and that's referring to this not quite upper class, but just a really well-educated middle class that was emerging within this era. So there was lots of writers who wrote within that class, and those were the philosophies. So these individuals were really big on reason, science, and education, and they thought that was important, and that based off the foundation of good reasoning, good science, and good education for every common man, then in that way you could have a stable and free society. Additionally, they thought it was important to figure out social problems. So they were really attacking politics and in a way to hope that they could solve. And they had 4 common principles. So in general, they believed that man was good, that that they were focused on the here and now, so the end of life is life itself, not life after death. So they were focused on just like, let's improve society through their earthly life. Man is capable of perfecting good life here on earth, so that we can actually improve our situation and learn more about the world, and through learning more about the world, we can find ways to improve it. And then, in addition, that it's important to not be ignorant. As part of a good life, you need to have a well-educated person who understands what's going on, who doesn't just blindly do things because they're ignorant or that's the way they were taught. Which, again, all these are good when applied correctly, right? So other ones, we have Rousseau, who we talked about earlier. Um, Education is a big part of society. That was his big thing, if you remember. People are basically good, mind and body work together, and in that case, physical education is important, and you must build up the body before you can develop the mind, because the body is the tool that you utilize to build the mind, to get information for the mind. So you need a better tool, a better body, in order to help the mind. You have Basedow, who's more of an educator. He was basing his school off Rousseau. He spent half his day during physical activity because he thought physical activity was very, very important. And he's kind of this modern physical educator where he had things modeled much like we did today. You have Goldsmith, who helped. Basically, what he did was he set out some guidelines for teaching physical education. He set standards. He wrote texts that were influential. He wrote books that were influential, and didn't just base this off ideals. He actually taught for 50 years. So, this is kind of a summary, but you're now seeing a society that's really accepting towards education and physical activity because they thought it was important to build up the common man. Physical education and sport were growing and part of Western civilization. Other parts of the world, again, were continuing what they had been doing. So kind of worldwide, sport still remains to be a central component of culture. And then, rather than just religious leaders or just noblemen, you now have scientists, philosophers, and educators who have influence and are able to argue and grow and develop to give us more information to help us better understand this world around us that God created. And I think that's a great thing. Cool. I know that wasn't the most exciting lecture ever, but I hope you have a good week. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Bye.